Hi guys, good evening or good morning or good afternoon depending on wherever you're joining us from. My name is Syed Faizan Raza. I am a service designer at Ideate and I'm also a panelist and a host and moderator for you for this webinar. The theme of this webinar, as you all know, is designing financial services, designing gender inclusive financial services, particularly for low income women using human-centered methodologies. We will be sharing our learnings, our findings, the processes, and the tools we used for a project that Ideo.org and Ideate did in collaboration last year. Before getting started, just a brief introduction of Ideate. We are a service design and digital design agency based in Islamabad, Pakistan. Um, in addition to working locally, we have done international projects in regions like the UK, in the Canada, in Middle East, and we're also currently exploring partnerships in some other regions also. Over the past couple of years, we have worked in the industries of healthcare. We've worked in financial inclusion, in social protection. We have worked in agriculture as well as home entertainment. And we're also doing some projects with the government right now. These are some of the clients we work with. These are both local as well as international. And we're currently engaged with a couple of these on their ongoing projects. Okay, so let's introduce you guys to our panelists today. First up, we have Amanda from IDEO. Hi, Amanda. Thank you for joining us. Can you briefly tell us about your role and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Amanda Schwartz from ideo.org. We're also a human-centered design firm with 3 studios across San Francisco, New York, and Nairobi. And I'm a senior program manager with ideo.org for our Women in Money program, which I'll tell you more about.
Right, great. Next up, we have Elise. Can you, hi, Elise.
Hi. Yeah, so I am Elise Rizvi. Right now I just graduated from Rhode Island School of Design with a master's in industrial design. Right now, just working on some personal projects while I look for job opportunities in the US. But this was a really exciting project for me to work on because I was in the summer, I came back to Pakistan and contributed to this research. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
All right, thank you. Then we have Rehan Akhtar from Karandaaz. Rehan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rehan. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Karandaaz. For those of you who don't know about Karandaaz, so Karandaaz is a not-for-profit focusing on financial inclusion. We're funded by UK's Department of International Development, DFID, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. For the work that we do, we're very, very involved in human-centered design. I myself have been, product manager as well, and I think it's a very, very underappreciated aspect of product design, but I think it has the most impact. So I think I'm going to learn a lot from a lot of experts on these panels.
Likewise. Next up, we have Hassam.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hussam, and I work as a design researcher at Ideate. So I've done a lot of projects in healthcare, in agriculture, in financial inclusion. Personally, financial inclusion is something that I'm really passionate about. And just using a human-centered approach to really understand the context that we're designing for before moving on to actually designing the solution. That's where I work.
Okay, thank you. And then that's me. I am a service designer at Ideate, but I focus more on design research. So in any project, I give a lot of attention to user engagement and field engagement, and really just creating and coming up with tools and methods to engage with them and come up with the best actionable insights that we can then use for the ideation and prototyping stages later on. The agenda for this webinar is we're basically going to talk about the project. We will then talk about what the financial inclusion landscape of Pakistan is, and then we'll talk about some of the processes and tools we use and what artifacts we created, some of the journey maps and the personas we had, and then we close off with a question and answer session with all of you. And in the middle of this, if you have any questions, just please drop them in the Q&A box. We might not answer them in the middle, but we have a dedicated Q&A section at the end, so we'll pull those up and then we'll answer you live over there. We'll also be interacting with all of you in the chat section throughout this webinar. And I'll now hand over to Amanda, who is going to take it forward from here.
Cool. So hi there, I'm Amanda. You already know this. Please be kind as I'm on a 6:30 a.m. Time zone. So I'm here to talk about women and money, but before that, I'm going to talk about Ideate.org. So we are a nonprofit design studio, as I just told you earlier in the introductions. Our mission is to design a more just and inclusive world. So we have studios across San Francisco, New York, and Nairobi. And just like Ideate, we've worked on a ton of different content areas. We've designed everything from the brand and physical space of nail salons in Nigeria for teenage girls to come and get their nails done and get advice and resources for their reproductive health. And we've also designed low cost and portable solar lights in India for farmers. So we also have quite a large portfolio in financial inclusion, which is where I come in. So Women in Money is a multi-year program funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and reliant and in collaboration with many, many partners across contexts, including Ideate and also Karandaaz. About a year and a half ago, we started on a journey to deeply understand what we call in financial inclusion the Kiko, or the cash in and cash out experience of low-income rural women and the barriers they face. And we're now in a phase of the program where we're exploring the opportunities to design for their inclusion. We're interested in Kiko because we believe that digital financial tools will help alleviate poverty and that Kiko points can drive meaningful use. The problem is that men across most contexts still access Kiko points at disproportionate rates, higher rates than women do. So that is what we're interested in solving for. The first year of the program was all about design research, and that spanned 6 different contexts, 3 in South Asia, of which Pakistan was 1, and 3 in Africa. Pakistan was actually the last country that we did design research in, which was really cool because it gave us, as the Ideate.org team, hunches to follow for research and kind of concepts to design around because we'd already developed somewhat of a global perspective. At the same time, it's what made it really valuable and crucial to work with Ideate and then also our local implementing partners like Karandaaz, because it made sure that we weren't biasing our approach by what we'd already learned. And I think that the Ideate team is going to talk a little bit more about process. So actually what the human-centered design process in design research for this project actually looked like. But I'll bubble it up a little bit just to say that after we were done design researching across all 6 contexts, we had what is called global synthesis. So that was our team at Ideate.org, our kind of core team of program folks and designers, as well as we have an interdisciplinary team of data scientists, behavioral scientists, and gender experts that also are part of this program and joined us for global synthesis. This was essentially 72 hours of us locking ourselves in a room and writing on 5 billion sticky notes until we made something that seemed coherent, aka a global perspective. So I'll give a very brief 15-minute overview of insights. It's by no means comprehensive, and we have a lot more in our global report, which I'll share a link to at the end. But just to give a sense for how our process helped get us to these insights, which then helped us get to some of the opportunities that we're excited to design for. This will come as no surprise to anyone that works in financial inclusion, but the first major insight is that the barriers to Kiko for women happen long before she walks to the agent. What that means is that digital financial services are often starting from a deficit, And they must actively convince women at every touch point that this is meant for her, because what she perceives is that Kiko and digital financial services are not meant for her. In many contexts and across all 6 of the contexts in which we worked, this ecosystem of DFS is built and lives in a broader ecosystem of social norms, laws, policies, behaviors, gender dynamics. And the biggest one of those is that money is the domain of men. So society doesn't necessarily view it as her right or her role to make financial decisions, which makes it really hard to bring her into digital financial services. This quote is from somebody in Nigeria who said, "A good man will provide for his wife and children. If he doesn't, no one respects him." So that means that rigid norms define women generally as caregivers and men as breadwinners. Makes it really difficult for women to feel included in financial decisions outside of the household. In Northern Kenya, we heard that you cannot decide alone or make decisions alone. Men must be involved for any financial choice. And in Nigeria, Mijin Haja is a derogatory term for women that take the position of men. We heard from one woman in Nigeria that she actually had a side job selling snacks, and she was able to pay her children's school fees. But she actually lied about it to her community and her friends because she was afraid of disrespecting her husband. And in India, we heard from Shiv that this is Shiv's husband who said, "I want to buy goats so we can start earning money, but my wife wants to pay back the debt we had from our wedding. We'll buy goats because my word is final." So women find that often if they are comfortable making a decision or an opinion in their household, that the final decision with in the financial realm rests with men or the head of household. One last example here is that in India, NREGS is a government welfare program, a government to person program that's designed to connect those experiencing poverty with paid work. The issue is that many women, like Amina to the right, said that taking a job with NREGS would be a last priority as it would reflect poorly on her and her family because she shouldn't work. And we see this play out across the 6 contexts in which we research. It's more severe in some cases than in others. In the African context, women do tend to have higher rates of employment than men. And in the South Asian context, those are much lower. So it gives us a sense for what the potential barriers are and how to design around those for each context specifically. The cool thing though, is that when it comes to her domain, which is her home, she exerts Herculean efforts to budget and save for her family, and she actually has a lot of autonomy within her home to make these choices. So that gives us an idea, I'll go back to that. That gives us an idea of how to design for this. For our entire global report is broken up by the problem, which might be that money is the domain of men, and then also her power. And in the her power sections, that's where at the end we'll kind of ladder up to what opportunity areas look like. And each of the contexts in which we worked help ladder up to this global perspective. So another insight is that there are rigid rules of what is perceived as acceptable and safe for women. That's outside of just employment. It could be also mobility, which we also saw in Pakistan. In India, we heard that I'd have to ask my in-laws for permission to leave the house, and I would listen to them. So when we're designing for cash in or cash out, it's really important to remember that digital financial services and Kiko points are designed mostly for folks that are mobile, that have phones, that are literate, that are numerate, and that are income earning. Women are generally rewarded for playing by these rules, and they're punished for breaking them. In Bangladesh, we heard that I'm free with a job. I don't have to ask anyone for money, but my husband doesn't like my having a job, so he wants me to quit. And this woman with whom we spoke did end up quitting her job. That also means that marriage in moments of crisis can trigger shifts in financial agency, which is in how money is divided, how work is divided, how money is earned, and how decisions are made. And we kind of see that from 2 different perspectives. There are macro shocks, which was really clear in the context of Northern Kenya. Climate change is driving migration patterns in Northern Kenya in households that are much different than they've ever been. So men are leaving their households at much higher rates, for migratory work and leaving women as head of households for longer periods of time. That means that she's starting to make financial decisions for the household and taking on roles that may not have been approved by her community before then. It also looks like microshocks. So that's something that happens in individual women's lives. That could be the death of a spouse or the income earning head of household, which then allows her to actually work with the support of the rest of her family or her community. So there are moments in life when these norms do flux and they have the potential to relax. So that's a really exciting opportunity for us as designers to figure out how to predict what those moments are and how can we design to level up her women's economic empowerment in those moments. Another problem, which we talked a little bit about earlier, is that financial services in general often reinforce the message that she doesn't belong. Women across contexts, across the 6 contexts in which we work, are less educated than their male counterparts. They have less rates of literacy and numeracy, less mobile phone ownership, and higher mobility restrictions. Digital financial services adds another layer to that. So it makes it really difficult for women who experience all of those characteristics to feel confident accessing them. In India, we heard, I'm not educated, so what if I made a mistake? If I were more educated, I might try, but I don't want to take that risk. And DFS really tests her at every touch point. She doesn't perceive them as options for herself, even in cases when she does use them. She's really swimming upstream to do so. So in Nigeria, we heard that I don't have money to buy a phone, and if I do, no one will teach me the process of using it. And this just builds on that financial services in general feel like they're not for her. And we see this just from the data across context, literacy, texting ability, and financial knowledge. What's not here is mobile phone ownership, but that's also true across contexts that men have higher rates of that. And we can see the difference in severity as well, which helps us to figure out what the unique opportunities are to design in context-specific ways and then also globally. So what DFS really promises from the provider perspective is security, safety, control, growth, new options. And we know all of that is true. We see how DFS does it raises empowerment across contexts if you're able to use it. But what women perceive is fraud, risk, inaccessibility, intangibility, and new barriers. So it's really important for us as designers to really listen to what it's like for women to use these services and start to design for how she perceives and uses them. What's cool, and we saw this in Pakistan, is despite all of this, she leverages what's familiar, her trusted proxies and analog workarounds to access services and fill gaps. So if there's a compelling use case for her to use digital financial services or Kiko, usually that looks like remittances. It could also look like being a beneficiary of a government-to-person program, and she'll find a way to do it, but it really is finding a way to do it. We found, especially in Pakistan, but across contexts, that proxies are more than a crutch. They can be powerful support systems and connectors, and also teachers. So in northern Kenya, we heard that a woman goes to town and does all of her transactions by herself because her kids taught her how to do it over time. So what might have started as proxy use ended up actually being somebody that taught her how to transact on her own. So when we look at all of these insights, it's also important for us to measure that against how we're looking at economic empowerment. So it informs how we design and what opportunities are worth pursuing to actually push her economic empowerment. So we worked with a few different metrics to come to this definition, but we've got influence, voice, and control. And there's more on this on our website. We don't have time to go into it at the moment, but we're really looking at these 3 things to figure out, okay, how much economic empowerment does she have and how do we find that? So we worked with our partners at Driven Data. They are a data science firm. And these 2 are for Kenya and Bangladesh. But what we found, and this was true across contexts as well, is that the green dots are what is positive and significant for driving economic empowerment. And the biggest thing we found here is that the ability for her to contribute to household income was the biggest driver for economic empowerment. So that gives us an idea of what the biggest impact and opportunities to design for across all contexts are, and that's really income generation. So the more she's able to contribute, the more she can exercise her voice, influence, and control over finances. So this all ladders up to global opportunity areas to explore. And this is just going to be a really quick overview of what that looks like. This is one of 5 different global opportunities that we have. The first is meet her where she is, don't make her come to you. So that's more of a design principle. But what that means is we've got kind of one hero concept, which is Kiko on the go. That's a roving agent model that could be applicable across contexts, obviously subject to different regulations. But it's a mobile agent that comes to her and is meant for her. So that means that it's possible that the mobile agent would be a woman, or that there's somebody with the mobile agent who is equipped to onboard women specifically, and that has the tools that she needs to be able to use DFS comfortably. That's kind of a more literal translation of meet her where she is, don't make her come to you. We also have other concepts and ideas to try at the bottom, including something like Bright Light Kiko, which is more of a theoretical make her come meet her where she is. What we found with women transacting at Kiko points is that, especially for those who weren't literate, the way that DFS providers generally provide confirmation that a transaction has gone through is via text. And that's really hard to trust if you don't read. So if the text says that my transaction was successful, I might not understand that or trust that, and I'll be unclear and I don't trust that the transaction has actually gone through. So Bright Light Kiko is just a way to attach a bright green light to a tablet. And when the transaction goes through, the light goes off and she's able to easily recognize that my transaction went through and I can trust that that happened. So there are a few different concepts here in the other ideas to try. All of this is meant to be open source for providers across contexts that they can take advantage of to be able to design better for women. And one more example here is help her take leaps when gender norms relax. So you can see how this kind of ladders up from the insights that we have. The big hero concept here is the newlywed nest egg. So that's the idea of using marriage as a moment to actually design for financial inclusion. That could look like a marriage counselor, a marriage financial counselor for newlywed couples that introduces DFS right at the start and kind of normalizes this idea of women using DFS for the betterment of the household. So really how we were able to have such deep design research success and expertise in all of these contexts was because of our strong partners. That means our HG partner like Ideate, who is just crucial in making this work strong in Pakistan, and then also our implementing partners that have really strong reach into the communities we're actually designing with. So that includes Karandaaz, mobile money providers across all contexts, other NGOs, who are able to introduce us to their agents or to women with whom they work, so that we're really able to get a sense for what it is to be a woman in these contexts and interact with these services. So thank you. And if you visit womenandmoney.design, you can find all of our country reports and our full report that has much more detail. And I look forward to any questions at the end. Faizan, back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Amanda. Yeah, over to you, Rehan.
Okay. So, hi everyone. So I'll just sort of, give a very short brief of how we got involved. While this was a sort of a global study, which was kind of done, and Pakistan was then later on included. So what we grapple with, based on sort of our body of work that we have carved out in Pakistan, is how to influence the product managers, how to influence the marketeers to appreciate and understand the nuances and the differences in different segments. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, what is considered is that women are categorized as one big sort of segment, and it is assumed that if you serve one woman, or if you identify a need of one woman, all women will have similar kind of needs and services as well. And we see that that mindset has really led to a lot of products and services, digital financial services, products and services, which have been launched, but they haven't gone anywhere. And I'll just sort of very briefly talk about the context that we have in Pakistan. So Pakistan is a country where it has a very low financial inclusion. About 21% of people are included. And the gap between how many men have an account or are financially included versus women, over the years that has increased. So as the supply has increased, as the banks have focused more and more on acquiring new customers, so they have intently or unintently focused more on men, and that basically is more and more excluding the women into financial inclusion. And so this sort of bar chart is basically a description of the demand side survey that is done. But if you look at the supply side data, which is issued by the central bank, only 22% women have accounts of the overall accounts that are there. If you look at the population, so more than 50% is actually women in the country. So from that aspect, it needs to be balanced out. So this research came on very, very handy. And we had some other researches as well, but I think so the other researches are more sort of survey-based research, and this was one of the two researches that we have done, which is human-centered approach-based. And I think the one key critique that comes very early on when we share this research is that it's such a small sample, and how could you extrapolate for the population? And because I think usually the policymakers and the decision makers are more attuned to look at 3,000 sample or surveys which were filled using pen and pencil, and using a long questionnaire. So we also try to educate the users that while this is a very small sample, but the researchers basically immerse themselves much more closely and deeply with the sort of target segment, and the outcomes are basically quite useful. So basically, our overall program is on women financial inclusion is divided into 4 areas, and I just wanted to sort of briefly mention that. One is definitely mainstreaming, in which we try to move our non-gender specific projects. These are infrastructure projects and transformational projects, digital projects, into sensitive, to be gender sensitive or intentional or transformative. The other one, what action item that we do is we measure the sex and this age disaggregated data, just to sort of see where are we making an impact. And then we also have pilots and experiments which are specific to this. So Amanda mentioned one of the key sort of recommendation was bring the cash in, cash out point to her. Don't make her sort of travel to the cash in, cash in point. So based on this point, we actually did a pilot with the bank in Pakistan in Haripur. In fact, we did it with Finca Microfinance Bank, where the whole pilot was designed in a way that there were women agents who were lady health workers previously, were hired and trained on financial services, and they went into the houses, and we saw although it was just a pilot, but we saw a very high engagement of the women customers when the product and service was presented in her context in a way where her guards were down, and and we asked these women agents that how did you go and convince women customers to start to open accounts. And the most of the intervention was on family dinners or family functions, or if there was a community function. And these lady health workers, they were already sort of known in the community, so it was not an alien face, and there was some relationship that was already going on. And then these lady health workers who then got converted into DFS agents, they continued to help these women when it came to any issues that the women were facing. And to our surprise, some of the women users became so comfortable with the financial app that they tried downloading. They tried sort of getting some e-commerce. They tried to use the e-commerce sort of feature in the app, and they complained that the delivery charges to their remote village is quite high. And all of us were surprised that this was never an imagination, that the whole idea was maybe they'll use some basic service. And so I think, I mean, it's a great application of the insight that the study kind of created. And I'll sort of briefly touch upon two more things. So in our research area, which is second vertical, we've also mapped, and we used Ideate in that study to map the BISP, which is a social unconditional cash transfer program for the poor, bottom of the pyramid. And we used them to identify that what are the issues in the journey, and how technology can play a role, so that given that the woman is illiterate, given that she has other constraint, and given that she has to come to an agent to get her sort of social fee. So what can be done at the agent? How can the tablet be redesigned? How can the biometric process be redesigned? And some very amazing outcomes which came, and they were then adopted by BISP, and it's part of now the new sort of system. One of them was, I remember that the study, again a human-centric study, kind of revealed how these illiterate women look at a number and how do they recognize a number, and their ability to read a number from left to right or right to left. And it was not a rounded number, so it was 4,600 something, and they said you should either round it up to 5,000 or 4,500, and that was also accepted. So very sort of concrete outcomes that came into that from that research as well. And then I just want to point out on the sector, enhancing the sector capacity. So we have launched a category that we are funding half of it, where we have invited all the fintechs or players whoever want to have a product and service available in the market, and they feel that their user interface or user experience needs to go through a formal sort of assessment. So we have 3 design firms. Ideate is actually one of them. So we're receiving applications from the parties who are interested to get this support, and we will fund half of the assignment. Well, half of the assignment is actually used by the given by the fintech or the company that basically wants to avail this facility. And based on this research, we are going to also now do a very specific category focused on women, because there are some very specific outcomes which I think could be drawn. So we really appreciate the work that has been done, and we have been using in our intervention design and we'll continue to do that. And if there are any questions at the end, happy to answer that.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Rehan. That really gives a good context of what the financial inclusion landscape of Pakistan is, and also builds in into what we're going to talk about next with the Pakistan leg of the project. I'll. Okay. Sam, I think you can control the screen because I'm on my phone, so it won't work.
Sure.
Okay. Next slide. Okay. So the discovery stage of the project, or the field research, or the empathy stage that you call it, it spanned 3 weeks in Pakistan. We covered the regions of Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi, both rural and urban areas. And our demographics for this were women with household income of less than 35,000 Pakistani rupees per month. So that today translates to around less than $250 per month. And out of these 59 people that we interviewed, we had around 40 women, and the rest were men in their families, or they were mobile money agents, or they were people in the marketplace that these women go to the most. Next slide. Okay, just to give you a visual context of the areas that we did this research in, the one on the left is a typical rural area that we went to. This particular one was Mardi Mangal Singh. This was a village around 2 hours from Lahore, and it had only about 80 to 100 houses. The primary source of income over here was either very small scale agriculture, or it was employment in nearby garment factories. The one that you see on the right is more of a peri-urban area. So we covered a varied low-income context in all three of these cities. Next slide. Okay. So the people that we engaged with in these research, especially in the rural areas, they did not have any formal education. So we could not just go up to them with a set of questions and ask them. We had to be very careful of the sensitivities involved. We had to be careful of the words we choose, of the language we choose, and even just the way of posing these questions to them. But none of it meant that these women, these people were not smart, or that they did not understand things. They actually just had a more visual and more tangible way of perceiving things, and we just had to adapt to that. And this was a behavior that we knew of even before this project from our previous experiences, both of Ideate and of IDEO. So we knew that our field discussion guides need to have some sort of activities and tools with it. So we came up with a couple of different visual tools that we used. One was mobility mapping. Sam, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. So the one that you see on the top left corner is the card sort game that we use to get the gender roles in the house. So what we did was we basically asked the women what their daily day looks like, what a typical day looks like for them. And then as they walked us through it, we put the different activities next to each of the members. So this gave us a visual representation, and also informed the women of the different division of labor they have. And it gave us a more deeper understanding into what their perceptions were, because then we asked them to switch these cards and see what they're capable of, and what jobs and what decision-making powers these women want to have. Similarly, I'll skip some of the tools because we don't have that much time, but we use sacrificial concepts. That's the one on the right, which is basically before going into the field, when we do a secondary research, we have these random ideas popping into our heads of the solution that might work. So what we do is we create pictorial representations of these, and we take them to whoever we're interviewing, and then we talk to them about it and see what the feedback is. These sacrificial concepts, you're not likely to use them in their current state because they're not backed by user research, but they help a lot in finding out what will work for them, what for these women, what will not work for these women about these ideas. And that helps tremendously when you're actually ideating and prototyping things, because now you have a better understanding that, okay, we had that idea that did not work for this reason, so we need to address that moving forward. Next slide. So whatever interviews we do for this project or generally in other projects also, we pay a lot of attention into observations and contextual inquiries. So for example, the one on the left that you see, this was a woman this was not our primary interviewee. She was someone who came and stood with us when we were interviewing someone else. And then throughout she was nodding and she was making these expressions that gave more cadence to what she was saying and gave us a deeper understanding of how deep these grievances were. So after we were done with the interview, we engaged with her further because she was very willing to open up, and we saw that as an opportunity to learn more about what she thinks about these services. Similarly, the image on the right is one where this is a woman who is showing us what she uses her phone for and how she uses it. Because when we're designing for digital financial services, we really need to know what the digital behaviors of these women are. And also letting them take the lead and showing them that we're trying to learn from them gives them more confidence, and it kind of breaks that power dynamic when you're going to someone's phone and talking to them, which is very important if you want them to open up to you. Next slide. Okay, so this was all the raw findings that we had. You can find more about this in the report, but I'll now hand over to Elise, who will talk about how we did the synthesis and how we brought it all together.
All right, hi guys. Very excited to do this. So I think we've covered quite a bit of how what we researched out in the field. I think I'm going to focus more on the synthesis, how we brought it all together. I'm not sure if this is working. Are the slides moving?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, yeah. So of course, the interviews and the field research had been very inspiring and very eye-opening for us. But I think it was very important for us after every interview that we did, after a whole day out on the field, to kind of pull this knowledge together, since we had collected stories, observations from the field, the context, the different contexts these women were in. So over the course of the day, whatever data we collected, whether this was on the form of notes, photos, quotes, we kind of collected it, and we would come together at the end of the day and do a mini synthesis. And this was really just laying out all important information, such as observations, the stories, and we basically shared with each other. For every interview, we laid out the background, any memorable quotes, opportunities or barriers that we saw onto post-its to have a record of our discussion for later larger synthesis sessions. This process really helped us make the individual learnings that we all had part of the group's knowledge base, and then download all these experiences while they were fresh and the perceptions were still fresh. Eventually, in the larger sort of synthesis session at the end of the field research, we took all this raw data and synthesized it into actionable insights, which some of them Amanda went through, and later Hussam is going to go through. So one thing that we did, which really worked for us in this sort of collaboration, was the fact that we had certain stages that we laid out, and eventually we actually completed this project in a remote collaboration form. So this happened once Amanda's team had returned to San Francisco. We carried out the later stages of the synthesis and the ideation remote collaboration, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. Just so as a way to kind of, this is something that is extremely relevant in today's context and time, since most of us are working from home or working across time differences. Even right now, we're in like 3 different time zones. So this is definitely a fantastic experience for our teams. So to begin with, we used very clear sort of communication strategies, being on the same page regarding how often we might have meeting calls. We would set up overall agenda for our meetings. And of course, there would be some sort of flexibility in this agenda, so that if something came up, we would still discuss it in the meeting. But really, in each of our meetings, we made sure, our videos were on. There was some sort of human element that was there throughout our meetings. We also made sure that we weren't working in silos. We used many collaborative tools. for our teams to be working on in regards to progress, which is really helpful. So whether this was working on Google Docs or specifically for synthesis, we used visual mapping a lot to convey information, which we feel is a very important part of the human-centered process and design thinking process. Secondly, we used a lot of communication tools as well, such as Slack for shorter, more quick updates, but really just being able to be communicative, direct with each other throughout, and make the time difference sort of work for us. So how we did this was we would work in Pakistan during the daytime and leave overnight for the work that we had done for Amanda and her team to go through it. And this kind of had a really nice, like, there was double the amount of work was being done over a period of 24 hours. So when we would return the next day, we had feedback ready to work on, and it was kind of a very smooth process, throughout. And the IDEO team would do the same with their progress too. Okay, so. And the last thing before I move on to the archetypes that we created was just really that one thing that really helped us brainstorm these ideas during the ideation process was having the information printed large and put up around the office. It was really helpful for our teams to always be aware of what we were working with and what the challenges were out when we were out in the field. Sometimes when you don't have this information in front of you printed large, you forget. We all also have a tendency to create these assets in a digital manner and have them up on our screens. But really what really helped us was having these charts information in front of us. And, it really helped generate a lot of good ideas in the ideation process. So moving on to the archetypes. So going back to the research a little bit, we created archetypes of the women we had met out in the field with the stories that we had learned about them, and really just laid out this information to understand their financial journey better, to get a better understanding of the different people that we had met on our journey, on our field research, and how these women and these archetypes related to each other in terms of financial independence and the factors that contributed to their financial journey. So in the interest of time, I won't be getting too much into the details of these archetypes, but you may access these personas on the Women and Money Design website. But really what I wanted to point out here was like some of the relationships became quite apparent in sketching when we mapped out these archetypes in the various stages, because what it became apparent was the milestones, the life events that contributed to their financial independence. For instance, the beginner, which I'm not sure if you can see because on my screen it seems like it's not visible, but the beginner, could receive an education and support from the family and move up this sort of pyramid from being financially dependent to financially independent. And this is, of course, the contributing factor here is the education, the support from the family that she needs to move up this ladder. Whereas you could see that one of the things that pushes her, one of the instances that pushes her into being a homemaker is the fact that she gets married. And even then, depending on the kind of support she might get from her family, she may become a contributor. This could be due to a lack of income or the income being small for the family. But there were also factors that contributed to her coming back to this stage. And so this was a really important chart for us because it made us understand that while she may move up, she could also come down to a previous stage. So for the contributor, this was really just to kind of show how there were a lot of women who contributed in the household due to certain life events that happened. And as an experimenter, this was interesting because this was really just her own personal venture that she would use to generate, have to generate a small income, which would push her up. We also it was also really interesting for us to find that, for instance, the death or sickness of a family member would push her into independence. This was certainly very interesting to find, and kind of in some ways it was really useful for our research as we laid out these different design opportunities further on. So for each of these archetypes, and this is again available online, we created these cash flow sort of journeys from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. This was a way to kind of gain a deeper understanding of how she spent the money throughout the month. So in this particular cash flow example, you can see this is basically for the contributor who had multiple income sources coming in. For her own small income, she would add that to her pool of money with her husband's money coming in. And then she would sort of spread these costs and payments throughout the month, starting from this pool and really just going down in the middle of the month after she would pay the bills for the household. But then because she had they had some sort of a second venture or second sort of income coming in, this would really keep her afloat till the end of the month. And that was actually super interesting for us when we laid out all these different cash flow examples throughout these archetypes, which was super beneficial for our research. And then lastly, the Kiko journey. We also laid out the Kiko journey for these various women. What were the triggers that would push them, to go out and interact with an agent? So this helped us understand how she utilized the Kiko services, if she did at all. And this involved a clear trigger as a reason she would want to go to the agent in her neighborhood, how she conducted the transaction, and what she used this money for. And this kind of also laid out, we came across a lot of different Kiko journeys, and this laid out in a very sort of a systematic way of what these different journeys were, and how we might take these journeys when designing new opportunities or designing new services for these women. I'm going to give this back to Faizan now, who can take this to Hussam, but that's it from my end. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise.
Yeah, I think I'll take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elise. I would just like to start by apologizing. Really sorry about the technical delays. I'll just make my part quick, and this is the last part before we move on to the question answer session. Rural communities, we found, were really built on social trust. And what that meant was that members of rural communities really rely on each other for many things, for many of their day-to-day activities. Women, for example, they pool up money and save money through Rosca groups. They buy groceries based on informal credit and then pay their tab at the end of the month. They turn to family and friends for loans, which they can get at zero interest, and they're really flexible terms. So that's ideal for them. So all these different examples of social relationships are extremely, extremely strong in rural communities. We met a woman who was affectionately known as Margie within her community because she essentially acted as a savings bank for her community. She started a Rosca group in the 1970s because she saw that her community was struggling to manage its finances. So purely just wanting to help out, she started this group. And today, she now manages multiple groups within her community, and people really look up to her and trust her. They store their money with her because they feel that it's safer there than at their own homes. They turn to her for financial shocks, and she even offers home delivery. So the key takeaways from this, there are two key takeaways, right? The first one is that these informal workarounds that women have, this is not something that's broken that needs to be fixed. And B, having said that, there are limitations to what Margie can provide for her community because her wealth is limited by the aggregated wealth of the entire community. So financial service providers really need to ask themselves the question, what are their services providing to these women that their current informal workarounds are not? And generally, it's also widely known that social and cultural norms in Pakistan really restrict the mobility of the women. But we found that there are certain conditions and certain activities within which it is considered okay for them to move around. Going to school with their kids, going to do groceries, or going to the tailoring shops. These are activities that are almost exclusively handled by women in rural communities. Additionally, if they go out in groups, it is considered okay for them to move about. And we also found that when women do go out, they really prefer to get all of their chores done in one go. In fact, one woman told us she was willing to travel up to 90 minutes to her mobile money agents because she trusted him that he would get the job done. And so that's really crucial for them. Tailoring shops and clothing shops in particular were a really interesting touch point for us because we observed that even if a man does accompany a woman to this shop, he stands outside. And that's really in contrast to what the normal behavior is. He lets the women take ownership and take control of that space. And we felt that that's something that's really powerful that can and should be leveraged by financial service providers. So we really just need to keep in mind of these limitations that they have regarding mobility, and we need to design their services around it. And I think it's also been established based on the previous insights and what the previous panelists said, that women generally are very afraid to try new things. But we found that it really just takes one woman who's bold enough to push past those barriers to inspire other women within a community to try new things as well. And we've seen multiple examples of this. One example is that many women we met took their first loan after seeing their neighbor take a loan. We met a woman who was forced to start supporting her family financially because her husband fell ill, so she started selling food. And within a few years, she really changed that perception within her community with regards to women being in public spaces and working in public spaces. And that's something that was really interesting. Additionally, people like Margie are also great examples of people that can really catalyze their communities. So we broadly observed three things that enabled women to be bold. One was emergent needs. The second was financial and social stability, which really allowed her to take these risks. And then just the third was the support of her family that really led to her being confident in herself and being confident to push past these barriers and try these things. So if we're able to really create learning opportunities from women like her, they can really be an example for the rest of the community to propagate financial services. And so following our field research, we created some concepts that addressed the context that we had really studied that the women would access these services in. And our aim was to really, with each concept, address a specific part of that context that would make financial services easier to use for women. So one of these was ration rickshaw, and I believe Amanda covered this as well. This is basically Kiko on the go. And so the idea of this is you, instead of having the women go out, you bring the services to them. And this is because the groceries is something that women do. Right, so within their household, when you're taking grocery shopping to them, this is something that they will still have control over even within their household. And they can also open mobile money accounts at this rickshaw and eventually even pay digitally. And so the larger goal of this was just to make these digital financial services more accessible to women. And in the long term, this could also connect rural communities to larger scale services such as e-commerce services. Another concept that we created was centered around the theme of making women feel comfortable in public spaces. So as I mentioned about the tailor shops initially, we observed that they already had to go through that process of having to adapt to make these spaces comfortable for women because it was critical to their business. And so we thought, why not take certain elements from these rural tailor shops and implement them in other spaces to make women feel comfortable there as well. And so we came up with this idea for a shop pack, which is basically a set of building blocks that any person can use in order to make their public space seem more comfortable for women. This can include things like makeshift barriers in order to clearly demarcate a separate line for women. Things like extending the counter a bit more so that the woman is more comfortable interacting with the man on the other side. And so the idea really is just to make it easier for anyone to make their public spaces more accessible and feel safer for women. And the final concept that we came up with, which is personally my favorite, was the leveraging the committee leaders. And so what this does is it leverages the influence that the committee leaders already have and uses that as a gateway to really propagate digital financial services to the rest of the community. So most of these committee leaders have these logbooks that they maintain that contain all the transaction history. And that is really key for banks and microfinance institutions. So instead of working against them, these institutions can work with these women, onboard them onto their platforms, and then provide them training, and then give them access to a line of credit that they can then propagate to the rest of the community. And you can really build on this service by providing a multitude of value-added services. The banks can partner with NGOs and nonprofits to offer things like financial literacy education, financial management education, education about digital tools in general, best healthcare and hygiene practices. So the possibilities there are really endless, and the idea is to create this ecosystem by which you are not only propagating financial services, but also other value-added services. And the focal point of this is your committee leader, an extremely, extremely trusted figure in local communities. So that really bridges the gap that women have, between being intimidated by formal financial services. And yeah, that's about it from my side. Thank you so much, everyone. I think I'll be throwing it to Faizan now, we'll begin with the question and answer session.
I think, Faizan, do you want to speak, or should you want me to take over? Just let me know.
Yeah, I think you should take over because my computer is acting up, so I can't access the Q&A properly.
That's all right. Yeah, so we have a lot of great questions there, and some of them Rehan and Amanda have answered, but some of them are still here. So I'm just going to pose them to you guys, and we can just collectively have a discussion, or maybe one of you can kind of take lead and answer these. So the first question is from Stefano. He's asking, in a DFS project, Microfinance, conducted in Jordan, I found interesting the way that people trust their community more than banks when it's about managing, saving, or landing money. This includes saving groups. That's one of the reasons why there are many unbanked people. Was something similar observed also during your research?
I can start us off if that's okay. Great question. Yes, we definitely did observe this during our research, but it was context dependent. So this was really true in Pakistan, especially in peri-urban areas where there were really strong communities, and especially communities that had savings groups. We saw and heard that there really wasn't a use case for a woman to want to approach a bank because all of her financial needs were met by her community. That was less true in contexts like Nigeria, where there's such a social pressure and yeah, kind of recognition that comes from having a bank account. So it really does depend on the context. We found that even though fees are higher in Nigeria and it's harder to access formal banking, women and men were more likely to do that just to have the social recognition of being a bank account owner, even more than mobile money.
Does anyone have anything else to add, or should I move on to the next one?
I'll just add that this is also sort of something, so agreeing to what Amanda said, and this also is verified from other researches as well, that, and this is not only for women, but also for large majority in Pakistan that is unbanked. They informal banking services, family and friends, groups, loan sharks, they basically go there, even to the grocery store, and the store, owner gives credit or, stuff like that. So it's basically a lot of need is fulfilled by the informal sector. And that's one of the key reason why, this unbanked segment do not feel the need, because the need is kind of met. And in fact, it's met in a very speedy, convenient, there's a lot of social collateral, very easy documentation, etc., etc. And the formal system is actually unable to beat or compete, that kind of speed and convenience. It's a 2-minute process to get a loan. You just go in, you ask, and you get it, or you don't, and you're done. Well, bank takes, days and days to even process an application.
Thanks, Rehan, for that. So I'm just gonna go to the next question, which is for you. This is on Facebook, and Faizan just sent this to me. Could you speak more about the process of translating your insights into action? What makes a productive working relationship with product managers, business stakeholders, etc.? This is for you, Rehan.
Rehan, you're muted.
Sorry. So, it's a very good question, and it's a big challenge. So, and as sort of explaining in another webinar, that we did wireframes of mobile money apps with great impact, another international firm. And unfortunately, in Pakistan, there was a very less uptake of those wireframes of the mobile app, and we actually got a lot of queries from African countries, and DFS players there, and they somehow found, and they wanted to use our wireframes. So in Pakistan, unfortunately, the mindset of the product manager is top down. Usually, the idea is to copy a product, and because a competitor has launched a product, so should we. And so everybody tries to mimic each other. Now, this may have been sort of useful. This approach may have been sort of okay when there were physical products, but in digital sort of context, where you have the analytics, you have the ability to contextualize, so the mindset still remains the same. So it's a big challenge to convince product managers to sort of adopt to these kind of tools and techniques. And that's where now we have launched this challenge round, and we have launched this support as well, because I think the designers also need some support. I hope it helps the designers here as well. Some of the companies have their own labs, but that is it. Nothing significant that comes our way.
Thank you, Rehan, for that. So I'm going to move on to the next set of questions. These are by Gulrez Khan, and all of these are actually really great questions. So I'm going to try to kind of, in the interest of time, kind of merge two questions, similar sounding questions. So his question is, how do we balance out the need for making women feel comfortable at Kiko outlets, or broadly when accessing financial services? And the next sort of question is kind of regarding the tailor shop being a fantastic example of where women don't necessarily need to be served by women agents, even for something as personal as clothing. How is that relationship of trust built? How might we learn more from this and use it in financial services?
I'm happy to start us off. It's great questions. So I think to your first point, how do we make sure that we're balancing the need for women feeling comfortable at Kiko to not just pinkwashing experiences and products? We can avoid a lot of these pitfalls, I think, actually by just good design research. So when we dig into what makes women actually feel comfortable, usually with research, we find that it's more deeply based on content and context. So if it's literacy, for example, then it might be having a low literacy adaptation to mobile phones. We had a rough prototype of a screen that would go over the numbers on a mobile phone, and it had symbols instead of numbers that women could recognize. And so then they were able to actually remember and put in their PIN. Or like Hussam said earlier, separate lines or barriers at Kiko points that could address her discomfort in being around large groups of men. So we've seen that obviously in many industries, simply pinkwashing designs is a thing that happens, but that to actually appeal to women, I don't think that those decisions are often based in meaningful human-centered design and design research, because we'll find that that's actually not a compelling reason or a way to make women feel comfortable. And curious if any other panelists have anything else on that. I can also answer the second question too. Does anyone have builds on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is something that we actually learned from IDEO as well. When we built out our concepts, we tried to look at them from a gender lens. Because oftentimes when you're like just building out your concepts, you don't realize that you might actually end up reinforcing the stereotypes that women currently have to face. So what you want with your concepts and with your solutions is you want them to either be a gender neutral, which means they don't really tip the balance. That's still okay, but you want to aim for something that's gender transformative. Which means it really challenges the underlying social norms and really tries to push past them. So that's something that we constantly applied during our brainstorming sessions as well, to ensure that we don't go down that rabbit hole of reinforcing those norms.
I'll just add to it a little bit of different sort of angle to it. So, for example, we did observe that there's usually, if they're at a retailer, if they're women and men, they would form a separate line. I'm talking about not the posh sort of retail, but the rural or peri-urban kind of retail. And a lot of time, if there are men out there also standing, so they would urge the retailer to attend to the women clients first. It's a social norm. Similarly with elderly, it's a social norm. I think there's some very powerful support system there, and it could be built on a bias that maybe the men feel that women should. I mean, either it could be out of respect, or it could also be out of the fact that, hey, what is she doing here? She should, get done and go home as quickly as possible, etc., etc. I don't know what bias is playing in, but these are sort of very, very firm society biases, which I think can be exploited to advantage in serving a woman and giving her an easier access, instead that she had to wait in queue if she gets to jump the queue because of the bias. I think we should also keep in mind that it serves that purpose of inclusion. I wouldn't reject that, at least.
Thank you, Rehan, Amanda, and Hussam. So the next part of the question was regarding tailor shops. Does anyone want to cover that one? Amanda, I know that you were going for that.
Yeah, definitely. So also a great question. I think we found this both with building relationships outside of just women to women, not just with agents, things like tailor shops, but also with women agents. It's really interesting. Across all of the contexts, we found that gender of the agent actually wasn't super important for women. A trusting relationship was the most important thing. How that trust is built is a little bit different based on context and sometimes very individualistic. So that could look like an agent always having the float that a customer needs or a client needs, especially if it's in a rural area and it takes somebody quite a while and a lot of effort to actually go to the Kiko point. That could also look like, the ability to text that agent to say, hey, do you have X amount of float? I'm, going to come in 2 hours, and having a quick response and an agent that's always open. Maybe it's these kind of unspoken agreements between women and agents, like they'll wait at the back of the shop while there's a big line, and the agent will say, hey, you can come up here in a different part of the line and I'll help you. Kind of these more, unspoken agreements between women and agents that help to build that trust. In northern Kenya, we found that agents who had these little agreements with people were really important. For example, there was a woman I remember that always went to one particular agent because he would switch the phone battery from his phone with her phone every time. And she had a solar charger that she could use at home, but she just preferred to do that with her agent. And it was kind of this small activity that made her feel like she could trust her agent. And it was an experience that she enjoyed. So I think that's true outside of agents, just like the tailor shop as well. The only exception I think that we found was that women agents generally tend to be better teachers, or they're perceived as better teachers for other women. So women that might not have as much comfort transacting in a Kiko point, or who might not have the literacy or numeracy to really do so confidently, they are more likely to want to go to a woman agent who will actually teach them how to make that transaction, because they're perceived to just be a bit more patient. But apart from that, I think, yeah, it was kind of cool to see that building a trusting relationship was very possible outside of gender.
Thanks, Amanda, for that. And I think I'm going to move on to the last question because we just have 5 minutes left. So the last question we're going to take is by Gulrez again, and it's actually related to COVID. So I think it's a good question to cover right now. So the question is, how do you see the ideas pivoting in this COVID normal? What's the future of Kiko as the supply side pivots away from agent-based solutions?
I can start this off. So I believe that it's still not going to pivot towards digital as much as it is in urban areas for us, because the rural sort of setup of dispersing these services through agents is still going to be for them relatively the norm of accessing these services, simply because they generally are not up to the mark that we are in terms of infrastructure development as well. And that means that if we are to give them a purely digital solution, that's something that's just not going to work. So I think the agent-based system is still here to stay for a certain amount of time, but I would like to also hear what Rehan has to say about this.
Well, so I'll bring in a different angle, which is that Pakistan is unfortunately a cash economy. And we have trillions and trillions of rupees in circulation, in cash, and at every sort of Eid, our central bank prints more cash and we distribute, and the fresh cash is sold at a premium. So there's so much in love. Our sort of non-cash or digitized economy is a very small portion. Now, in employment in Pakistan, or economic activity in Pakistan, especially the employment, if you take it up, or even the trading or agriculture, that is all in the informal sector. So there is no value chain large enough where this cash gets converted into digital. And that's a big burden on the overall ecosystem, the digital finance ecosystem. And a lot of time we wonder that what kind of a behavior would happen where all this cash could eventually, become predominantly digital, and there will be less than, 10, 20, 30% cash, which is still out there. Because there are very few people, I think maybe million or 10 million or something like that, who are employed and who get a salary. There are a lot of domestic workers who get paid in cash. Workers who are employed in agriculture value chain are paid in cash, etc., etc. So this Kiko touch point is a key touch point to convert cash into digital. So the cash in. The expectation is, the bet is that cash in the velocity of cash in would be more than velocity of cash out. So, we would start seeing cash depleting and, digital deposits sort of increasing. And we have seen that it has happened. But still, the phenomena is in favor of, people keeping cash. In fact, if anything, we actually believe that there are about 190,000 active Kiko agents in the country. I think this needs to go to at least 1 million. so that if there's any sort of issue or hurdle when it comes to the access to an agent when I need it 24/7, these should be available everywhere. So some industry pundits basically extrapolate that we need more than 1 million cash in cash out agents to really take the burden of converting. Yes, the reliance on the agent to subscribe to a financial service, that has definitely started to come down. So if my electricity bill, so instead of taking money to the agent and the agent then sending money or paying money, that has shifted to the mobile account more.
Yeah. I'll just jump in with one more thing. I think more than doing away with agent locations, we need to look more into contactless transactions. So even we saw with the SRS program currently that we're dispersing cash grants, relief cash grants. So what they did was it wasn't exactly their aim wasn't to have contactless transactions, but they were trying to facilitate the woman whose thumbprints had worn off. So they reverted to a pin-based and OTP-based system, so you don't have to use your BVS. Now that might be a step back, but these are some more options to explore and how you can ensure contactless transactions and facilitate women in that manner, instead of having your BVS done, which you're coming in contact with lots of other people's fingerprints and that also. So that's also one. We can take the existing concepts and then see how we can make them contactless in that scenario. And I think we are over time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I know we have lots of other questions. What we will do is that we'll be answering these over the next couple of days on our social media channels. So if your question has gone unanswered, don't worry, we'll still follow us on our social media and we'll be answering those over the next couple of weeks. And I think that's about it. Thank you all the panelists for joining us today. We hope to do something similar again come in the next couple of weeks. And thank you all the participants also. I think that's it. We're gonna sign off now.
Yeah. I would just like to add that if anyone wants to reach out to us with further questions as well, our email address is on your screen. And yeah, thank you so much. This is a super interesting discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.